In 1973, Warner Brothers executives watched Blazing Saddles and sat in total silence. Not one person clapped. Then the studio chairman pulled Mel Brooks aside and asked if he could reshoot the entire movie with a white actor playing the lead. Brooks wrote down every demand on a legal pad and smiled. The moment the executive left, he crumpled up the paper and threw it in the trash. What the studio didn't know was that Brooks had final cut. They couldn't force him to change anything. This is the story they tried to bury. In 1972, Mel Brooks felt like everything was falling apart. He had already made 2 movies. The first was The Producers in 1967, which cost $941,000 to make, but only earned $375,524 worldwide. Even though he won an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, the movie barely made back a third of its cost. Then came The 12 Chairs in 1970. That one had a bigger budget of $1.5 million, but flopped even harder. Critics didn't care for it, and audiences didn't show up. After that, Mel couldn't sell anything. He tried to pitch a comedy based on She Stoops to Conquer, but no studio wanted it. He was broke. His wife Anne Bancroft was pregnant, and there wasn't even enough money for basic things. That's when a man named David Begelman stepped in. He got Mel a small writing job at Warner Brothers in 1972. The job was to work on a strange Western script called Tex-Ex. It wasn't even meant to be made into a movie at that point. But that little writing job was the start of something big. It became Blazing Saddles. Back in 1961, when Mel had just started dating Anne Bancroft, he couldn't even afford dinner. She was a famous actress, but he told her they couldn't go to any fancy place. They went to a small Chinese restaurant. When the bill came, it was around $11 or $12. Mel panicked because he didn't have enough. Anne quietly slipped him a $20 bill under the table. Mel told the waiter to keep the change, trying to look cool. Outside, Anne slapped him and said, "Don't tip with my money." But she stuck by him anyway. She believed in him. She told him, "You're talented. You're gonna go places." When they were working on the script for Blazing Saddles, the original title was Tex-Ex, like a joke about Malcolm X. But the studio hated it. They said it sounded like an adult film. Then Mel tried Black Bart, but they said it would confuse people with the real outlaw from the 1800s. Then he suggested The Purple Sage, but that felt too old-fashioned. One day in the shower, the name just came to him. Blazing Saddles. When he told Anne, she said it didn't make any sense. Mel just said it didn't have to. It sounded wild and Western. That's what mattered. Richard Pryor helped write the script. He was smart, funny, and raw. Mel wanted him to play Sheriff Bart, but the studio said no. They said he was uninsurable because of his drug arrests. Mel told Pryor the role was his, but never called him again. Pryor only found out from actor Cleavon Little in early 1972 that he wasn't going to be in the movie. Some people close to Pryor later said Mel never really intended to cast him and was afraid Pryor would steal the spotlight. By that time, Mel felt like he was out of chances. 2 big failures behind him. No one trusted him with a film anymore. When Warner Brothers finally gave him the green light in 1973 with a $2.6 million budget, it felt like one last shot. Nobody expected it to work. Not even the studio. Mel wanted a big name to play the Waco Kid. He gave the script to John Wayne, thinking the legendary cowboy would bring real Western power to the film. Wayne read it overnight and said he loved it. But he couldn't do it. He told Mel, "This is too dirty. I'm John Wayne." He said it would upset his fans, but he promised he'd be first in line to see it. Mel then picked Gig Young, a 60-year-old Oscar-winning actor who once played a drunk in They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Mel thought Gig could pull off the role of an alcoholic gunslinger. He was told Gig had recovered. But during his very first scene, while hanging upside down in a jail cell, Gig started shaking badly. Mel thought it was acting at first. Then green stuff started coming out of his nose and mouth. He had to be rushed to the hospital. He was suffering from severe alcohol withdrawal. Mel later said, "That's the last time I'll ever cast someone who really is that character." Now the production was falling apart. Mel called Gene Wilder in tears. Gene had already said no once because Mel wanted someone older. But now, with everything on the line, Mel begged. Gene just said, "I've been waiting for the call." He didn't even read the script first. He flew out and started filming that Monday, just 3 days after Gig collapsed. Mel said Gene saved his life and saved the film. With Wilder and Cleavon Little together, something clicked. They didn't look like old and young opposites. They looked like real friends. Both came from New York theater. That gave them a natural rhythm. That friendship made the ending believable. They could ride into the sunset not as teacher and student, but as equals. Even though Pryor helped create the character of Bart, he was pushed aside. Mel always said the studio wouldn't insure Pryor. But after Pryor died in 2005, people started asking questions. No one from Warner Brothers ever confirmed that story. Pryor's biographer said Richard was completely shocked when he found out he wasn't going to be in the movie. Some believed Mel made up the insurance excuse to avoid blame. Others said Mel just didn't want to be overshadowed. When the film was finally shown to Warner Brothers executives, they sat in silence. Not one person clapped. One guy said maybe they could release it in just 3 cities. Some wanted to bury it altogether and write off the $2.6 million loss. They laughed a bit at the campfire fart scene, but thought the rest was too much. Only one executive, John Calley, said they should think about it overnight before killing it. After the screening, studio head Ted Ashley pulled Mel aside with a list of demands. Remove the N-word. Cut the fart scene. Get rid of the horse punch. Remove the black and white romance. Then he said the most shocking thing. He asked if Mel could reshoot the movie with a white actor playing Bart. Mel didn't react. He calmly wrote down every demand on a legal pad. He nodded, smiled, said, "Sure, no problem." As soon as Ashley left, Mel crumpled up the paper and threw it in the trash. What Ashley didn't know was that Mel had final cut. No one could force him to change a thing. The studio was still trying to stop the film. They told theater owners not to play it. But it was too late. Some theaters had already booked it, and Warner Brothers didn't have another film ready to take its place. Mel's producer, Michael Hertzberg, had an idea. He arranged a second screening, but didn't invite any executives. He filled the room with secretaries, janitors, mailroom workers, regular people. From the very first scene, the room exploded in laughter. People were falling out of their seats. That reaction changed everything. Still, some at the studio wanted to kill it. They seriously discussed throwing the whole $2.6 million into the trash. They thought it would ruin their reputation. But then the movie opened in February 1974 in just 3 cities. What happened next stunned everyone. Audiences went wild. Word spread fast. The film made $119.6 million in North America. About 63 million people saw it in theaters. It became the highest-grossing comedy of the year. Adjusted for inflation, it made close to $600 million. The studio that wanted to bury it had accidentally made one of the biggest comedy hits in history. Blazing Saddles came out on February 7, 1974, with a premiere that nobody expected. At a drive-in theater in Burbank, 250 guests arrived on horseback. But the truth was, the studio didn't believe in the film at all. They were so unsure that they only released it in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Warner Brothers chairman Ted Ashley told Mel Brooks to just forget it and said the movie was too disgusting and vulgar. One distributor even said they should never release it. Critics weren't impressed either. Reviews were mixed, some even terrible. But something strange happened. In the theaters, people laughed so hard that even critics who hated it had to admit the audience was loving every second. That laughter turned into a wildfire. Word spread fast. What was supposed to fail suddenly became something no one could ignore. Even though it wasn't expected to last more than a few weeks, the movie kept growing. Blazing Saddles hit #1 at the box office on April 17, 1974, but it took 10 full weeks to get there, which was almost unheard of. Most movies peak in the first or second week. This one kept getting bigger while going up against giants like The Exorcist and The Sting. The Exorcist had already held the top spot for 13 straight weeks. The Sting kept bouncing back too. But by the time summer came, Blazing Saddles was drawing long lines in theaters all across the country. Around 63 million people watched it in North America, which was more than any single Lord of the Rings movie ever got in the US. It didn't just succeed. It proved every studio executive completely wrong. And the most surprising part? It was made for only $2.6 million. Even in 1974, that was small. Warner Brothers didn't want to spend real money because they thought it would flop. But it didn't. It earned $119.6 million in the US alone. That was a return of more than 4,600%. It became the highest-grossing movie of the year, beating films with 10 times the budget. And even during filming, the studio kept trying to change it. They told Brooks to cut 26 scenes. That included the famous campfire scene, the horse punch, and nearly every moment that used the N-word. Brooks sat in a meeting with Ted Ashley and wrote down all their notes. But the moment Ashley left, he crumpled up the paper and threw it in the trash. He kept everything just as he wanted. That $2.6 million risk became Warner's biggest moneymaker that summer, pulling in $16.5 million during just the summer run. But even with all that money, Mel Brooks barely got paid. He received only $50,000 for writing, directing, acting, and overseeing everything. That was it. He was responsible for the whole thing, yet he walked away with an amount that couldn't even buy a decent house at the time. The studio made tens of millions, but Brooks got scraps. This showed how unfair Hollywood accounting really was. Studios would make huge profits but claim losses on paper. At the time Brooks took the job, he was broke. His wife, Anne Bancroft, was pregnant. Even though the producers from 1967 had made him famous, he was struggling to get work. Warner Brothers took advantage of that. And even after he saved their summer, they treated him like just another hired hand. When Brooks needed a singer for the theme song, he put out a call for someone like Frankie Lane. To his shock, the real Frankie Lane actually showed up. Lane had been famous for singing Western songs like High Noon, Gunfight at the OK Corral, and Rawhide. But Brooks never told him it was a comedy. Lane thought he was singing for a serious Western. He gave it his all. Brooks later said, "Frankie sang his heart out, and we didn't have the heart to tell him it was a spoof." After Lane recorded the vocals, whip cracks were added. That mix of serious singing with goofy visuals worked so perfectly that the song got nominated for Best Original Song at the 47th Oscars on April 8, 1975. The film earned $119.5 million and ended up as the 7th highest-grossing film of the year. There was something else that made the film unforgettable. For the first time in American movie history, audiences heard real fart sounds on screen. That campfire scene, filled with cowboys eating beans, broke a Hollywood rule that had lasted for decades. The flatulence went on for almost a full minute, around 60 seconds of pure noise. Actor Burton Gilliam, who played Lyle, proudly said, "I am the first person in motion picture history to fart." Before this, no American film had dared to include that kind of humor. After this, it became fair game for comedies everywhere, from Dumb and Dumber to Bridesmaids. And those sounds? They weren't real. Mel Brooks and his team made them by hand. In post-production, they rubbed soap and water under their armpits and moved their arms to make the sounds. Brooks said they tried all sorts of tricks to get the perfect noise. They weren't using actual fart recordings, they were doing it themselves, one sound at a time. They controlled the pitch and tone so carefully that it sounded like a real group of cowboys letting loose. This homemade method made the scene even funnier and set a new standard in comedy sound design. But Brooks didn't just throw a bunch of sounds into the mix. He tested everything. At first, he had 16 fart sounds in the scene, but he noticed something. People didn't start laughing hard until the 4th or 5th sound, and by the 12th, the laughs started to fade. So he made a decision. Cut it off at 12. Not 11, not 13, just 12. That was the number that got the most laughs. He said, "I did it kind of systematically. I do a lot of homework." That attention to timing showed how well he understood the rhythm of comedy. He didn't just want people to laugh, he wanted to squeeze every laugh possible out of them. Filming that scene wasn't easy. They had to shoot it from 35 different angles. Burton Gilliam said they probably did the scene 100 times. The problem wasn't the camera, it was the actors. They kept laughing. After a few takes, nobody could hold a straight face anymore. Eventually, they brought in extras to stand in for the actors who couldn't stop giggling. Brooks told Gilliam, "I'm going to make you famous today." And he did. Gilliam said he knew it would be funny, but he didn't know he'd become the first person to ever fart on screen. Even after it was finished, the studio tried to censor it. Ted Ashley, the Warner Brothers chairman, watched the final version and demanded cuts. He wanted the entire fart scene removed. He also wanted the N-word taken out, the horse punch cut, and Lily Von Stupp's love scene trimmed down. Brooks sat and took notes during the meeting. Then, just like before, he crumpled up the paper and threw it in the trash. He had final cut rights in his contract, and he used them. The studio didn't get to change anything. Every moment stayed in the film, just as he made it. In the end, Blazing Saddles wasn't just a comedy. It was a full-blown rebellion. A film that every expert thought would fail turned into one of the most successful comedies in Hollywood history. It was made with a tiny budget, faced endless censorship, and was led by a director who was broke and desperate. But that same director had the courage to ignore every rule, trust the audience, and go with his gut. And because of that, everything changed. In 1974, when Blazing Saddles was being filmed, the atmosphere in America was tense. Just 6 years earlier, Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in 1968, and racial tensions were still high. So when Cleavon Little, a black actor, took the lead role in a movie filled with racial slurs, it wasn't just acting. It was stepping into the middle of a cultural explosion. The movie used the N-word 17 times, and that alone made people furious. Studio executives at Warner Brothers panicked more than once. They actually stopped the filming several times, afraid of what might happen. The film's budget was only $2.6 million, and even with that tight budget, they were scared they'd lose everything if people didn't understand the point of the movie. Cleavon Little became the center of the storm. He wasn't just playing a character. He became a target. He got hate mail. He got death threats. The studio didn't want the public to know how bad it was behind the scenes, because they feared it would kill the movie before it ever hit theaters. Some people didn't realize the film was making fun of racism. They thought it was serious. When Blazing Saddles premiered in February 1974, some audience members didn't get the joke. They thought the racist characters were telling the truth. They didn't understand that the movie was trying to show how stupid racism really is. And so, Cleavon Little, instead of being celebrated for his brave performance, got attacked for being part of it. It was like the movie exposed him to the very thing it was trying to destroy. Even some of the white actors in the movie struggled with it. Burton Gilliam, who had just left his job as a Dallas firefighter and wasn't really an actor yet, played a racist railroad worker named Lyle. His job in the movie was to throw horrible insults at Cleavon Little. But in real life, Gilliam hated doing it. Between takes, he kept saying sorry to Cleavon. He felt sick about the words he had to say. He later said he had a lot of problems saying those things. But Cleavon told him, "If I thought you meant it, we'd probably fight. But it's just a movie. Someone wrote those lines." He even told Gilliam he could change the lines or add to them if he wanted. He gave him full permission to lean into the role, because Cleavon knew the purpose was bigger than either of them. It wasn't about one scene or one insult. It was about showing people how ugly racism looked and how ridiculous it sounded. Even though the movie was funny, the reality of making it was filled with tension. There were security threats that Warner Brothers tried to hide. The movie was being filmed in the desert, with a small crew and a tight budget. Any bad press or public scare could ruin it. Cleavon was especially vulnerable. Being a black leading man in a movie that dared to use racist language was dangerous. They had to keep security quiet so the threats didn't make headlines. But the pressure never went away. Every day Cleavon showed up on set, he carried that weight. In one surreal scene that only lasted 20 seconds in the movie, Mel Brooks had the entire 17-piece Count Basie orchestra flown out to the middle of the Mojave Desert. They played April in Paris, the same version from 1956 with Ella Fitzgerald. All of them sat in tuxedos, in the middle of nowhere, playing jazz while the sheriff rode by without even noticing. That single joke, with no words spoken, cost a big chunk of the film's $2.6 million budget. Brooks didn't care. He believed if it was funny, it was worth it. That kind of thinking came from Brooks's early days. When he was 14, he made a crowd laugh at a lodge in the Catskills by pretending to be a district attorney. That's when he learned the power of breaking the wall between reality and comedy. He carried that idea into Blazing Saddles, constantly reminding the audience that this was a movie, a fantasy, something made up. He didn't want to hide the tricks. He wanted people to see them. His influences came from people like Brecht, Godard, and Buñuel, who all broke rules on purpose. One of the wildest rule-breaking scenes comes near the end of the movie. Cowboys literally crash through a movie screen and end up on the Warner Brothers lot, interrupting a musical being filmed with dancers in top hats. One of the executives, Ted Ashley, hated this scene. He thought it was disrespectful and confusing. He even said the studio should just cancel the film and take a tax write-off instead of releasing it. But another executive, John Calley, stood up for Brooks and said they should test it in just 3 cities: New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. That test happened on February 7, 1974. During filming, Brooks got more pushback from the studio. They told him not to include a scene with the gay chorus boys dancing in top hats. They said, "Don't do the gay scene. You're going too far." But Brooks refused. He told them those scenes were always being filmed at Warner Brothers, and this one was just part of the joke. The movie already had fart jokes, racial slurs, sexual jokes. He wasn't going to cut anything just because it made someone nervous. and he had the power to say no. Ever since his first movie, The Producers, he made sure he had final cut. That meant only he could decide what stayed in the film. When the studio sent him a list of edits for Blazing Saddles, he took the list, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash. He didn't change a single line or even a facial expression. And that gamble paid off. The movie premiered in Burbank with 250 people showing up on horseback. It went on to earn $119.6 million that year, becoming Warner Brothers' biggest hit of the summer and the second highest grossing movie of 1974. Brooks himself only got $50,000 for directing and writing. There was just one scene he cut himself. In a 2012 interview with Conan O'Brien, Brooks said there was a line during the sheriff's seduction scene that he felt was too much. The line was, "I hate to disappoint you, ma'am, but you're sucking my arm." It never made the final cut, and that was Brooks's own decision, not the studio's. At the 47th Academy Awards in 1975, Blazing Saddles was nominated for 3 Oscars: Best Supporting Actress for Madeline Kahn, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Song. But it didn't win any of them. It made people laugh, it made people angry, but it didn't bring home awards. Decades later, times had changed. In August 2020, when HBO Max added the film to their platform, they didn't just play it. They added a 3-minute introduction by film scholar Jacqueline Stewart. She warned viewers that the movie had racist language and explained that the characters using those words were being mocked, not celebrated. Today, people call that a trigger warning. In 1974, it played without one. In September 2017, Mel Brooks said on the BBC that the movie could never be made today. He blamed it on political correctness. He said, "It's the death of comedy." Some people agreed. Others thought he was missing the point. He later explained that without the N-word, the movie wouldn't have made sense. You wouldn't understand just how hated the sheriff was. And by showing that hate, the movie made it look ridiculous. The film broke every rule Hollywood had. From its start on March 6, 1973, through its release in February 1974, it pushed every boundary. From Madeline Kahn's sultry performance to a man punching a horse to cowboys breaking wind around a campfire, it refused to follow any formula. And it worked. It even inspired other parody films to take similar risks. Alex Karras, who played Mongo, was in the movie for less than 8 minutes, but his scenes became iconic. Years later, when CBS showed the film on TV for the first time in October 1981, they added back deleted Mongo scenes that had been too much for theaters, but were okay for TV. One of his lines, "Mongo only pawn in game of life," was written by Richard Pryor, who co-wrote the screenplay but wasn't cast in the lead role. In 2024, Blazing Saddles celebrated 50 years. Warner Brothers released a 4K version on November 19th, and they put it back in theaters starting September 15th. On YouTube, hundreds of reaction videos popped up with new viewers laughing and gasping at scenes people were still debating half a century later. The Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry back in 2006, proving it had become a part of American history. Whoopi Goldberg even defended it on The View, saying, "It hits everybody." That was the point all along.